Oh, my name is Elisa Douglas, Director of Alumni Engagement and Programs at Columbia Business School, and we're pleased to have you join us tonight. I am joined here by Carla Ruiz, class of 2006, proud grad from 2006, and board director on our Columbia Business School Women's Circle. Tonight, she's leading a conversation with Anushka Salinas, and tonight's program will be around leading through change, reinventing your professional path. So I'm now going to hand it over to Carla.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And welcome everybody. We're excited to have this conversation with Anushka. Just to kick it off, Anushka, as most of you know, is currently the CEO at Nanit. Nanit is a baby monitor device that helps track sleep and breathing. And for all of us, moms, we know how important that is for our own sleep as well as for our babies. She was also the former president and COO at Rent the Runway. And, funny enough, she actually met the founders of Rent the Runway while she was at CVS, started as an unpaid intern. And so Anushka graduated from CVS in 2010, and then went on to work for Rent the Runway as a director of merchandising. Left in 2013. Interestingly, then went back in 2017 as GM of subscription, and then worked all the way up to CEO, COO, and president. And so, Anushka, if I can turn it over to you, I think we would love, in the context of the key topic of the conversation today, I think we'd love to get a sense, maybe to begin with, in terms of what are the leadership skills that for you over time have become the most important, right, as you assume that CEO role. And as you think of them, which one were some that you had to develop as you went along and that you have evolved as well, right? Like through the different phases in your career.
Yeah, well, excited to be here and thanks folks for joining. Hopefully we'll have a really fun conversation today. It's a great question. I think one of the things that is maybe slightly cliche, but I think is very true, is that in all leadership positions, especially as you get more senior, the thing that is probably the most important through line and skill that's required is being able to hire, recruit, identify, recruit, and retain great talent. And the more, I've taken on more and more senior roles over time, I've come to realize with each passing year how important that is, because the bigger your role gets, the bigger the organization you manage, the more leverage you need. And the only way you can actually really do that and multiply yourself, aside from now the crazy world of AI, is by having great leaders underneath you. And one of the things that my former boss at Rent the Runway, the founder of Rent the Runway, taught me really early on was like really leaning into and appreciating people that have different skills than your own. I think earlier in my career, when I was sort of like a middle manager kind of position, you get in that thing where you don't necessarily, you're a little threatened by people that are better than you, that are different than you. Maybe you haven't developed the appreciation for people that have sort of the yin yang skill set to what you are really great at. So I've come to, I think, really understand and appreciate people that have really different skills than my own because they help see the world in a different way. And very much, I spend a lot of time on recruiting, on meeting great talent, on thinking about how I can create roles for great people I've worked for in the past. Just because when you find that sort of like N of one talent, you really want to bring them in, and have them sort of help you be a force multiplier.
And I don't know if this is relevant for you coming back to Rent the Runway, but curious, as have you ever made a pivot that worked out better than others, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, probably pivot. I don't know whether it was totally a pivot, but at the time it felt like a pivot. I had left Rent the Runway, the first time in 2013 to take on a bigger scope of role at a big, retail conglomerate, Hudson's Bay company. And they had sort of attracted me with like a really nice salary. And, I took the job for the money effectively, right? And I, within 6 months, regretted that decision. I actually ended up learning a lot. Um, the company was going through a period of change, acquired a couple of companies during that time. And so I got to see what integrations look like and things that I hadn't quite seen. I pretty quickly saw that I missed the startup world. I missed the pace and speed of a really innovative company, a technology driven, kind of forward thinking company that was creating a category. And so I saw pretty quickly like this role that I had taken on wasn't for me. So within like 18 or 24 months, I was itching to get back into the startup world. And I ended up taking a move into a really early stage company. And what I realized through that move was that pre-product market fit is too early for me, right? Like my particular skills, I'm an operator. I love to get to take a great idea, make it better, put process around it, help it grow. But coming from effectively nothing is very difficult for me. Some people are great at this. I think it requires kind of a different set of skills. And so that pivot for me, where I was trying to pivot back into kind of an earlier stage startup, something that had that sort of pace, that energy, that ability to drive impact, I was like, oh, I went too early. Like, and so it was a lesson that I have taken very seriously, which is stage of company, I think matters a lot. And one of the things that I always encourage people to do throughout the course of their career is to try and like experiment and really understand where does your passion lie and where do your skills lie that helps you got, for instance, my husband has worked at Citigroup since the day he left CBS. We met at CBS. He loves it there. He, will probably be there and he'll retire there. He loves a huge company. He's like a big company guy. I don't think I could do it. I'm not cut out for that. But I think it's great that he knew that really early on in his career and has stuck with it. And so I always think it's really important for people to think critically about like what stage of company, and I think the impact that you want to have and how hands-on you want to be is a big driver of that.
That's so interesting. And so, if for you being in a fast-paced environment, right, where you can react quickly, but there's also, a number of problems that you have to solve and go from A to Z, right, in relatively, a short period of time, um, is what resonates the most with you. How do you think of, are there certain areas that you perhaps underestimated about operating in a, smaller, fast-moving company?
You mean in the sort of pivot that I had made to the very
Yeah.
small company? Totally, right? I'm a type A, like to get my hands dirty. And I was almost smacked in the face by this experience of employee number one, so there's n nothing. You're working with nothing. You're building everything from the ground up. And what I found there is that the level of discontinuous thinking that you need, like suspension of disbelief, has to be incredibly high when you're needing to imagine a future where you can take an idea and nothing more and turn it into, like, let's say, a multi-billion dollar business. That requires a different mental model and ability to think a certain way than, coming into, say, a Series C company, or even a Series B company that has some level of product market fit, and then you're kind of taking it and growing from there. So I think it actually was less what the work was, and it was more the mindset that you have. And perhaps like
And
create, maybe I would say creativity, right? Like you have to be like really a creative thinker at that stage.
and your career has also been, right, like deeply rooted in consumer and in brands. How did that foundation, how do you feel it prepared you for leading a tech-enabled product company now like Nanit? And I'm sure lots of learning from Rent the Runway as well, but what would you say are the most transferable skills, right? Like from one job to the next?
People always sort of ask that question, and it's funny. So I started my career as a retail buyer, in a training program at Lord& and Taylor, which is a store that doesn't exist anymore. Those training programs barely exist, but they were an amazing, it was almost like the GE training program, except for retail. Those were amazing training grounds for people that were early, kind of coming out of school, wanted to learn how to run a business, learn how to run a P&L, really understand the nuts and bolts of a consumer business. And interestingly, the skills that I learned there are totally transferable to consumer technology, to building even a hardware product. Because ultimately, you need to be really deeply in touch with what the customer is telling you. And in those days, it was like, printouts I would get on a Sunday night or whatever, that would tell me what had sold in the prior week. It's funny to think about now, right? That would help me understand what did the customer want and where was I successful in choosing things for that customer and where was I not successful. And then you fast forward all the way to where I am today, which is building technology products, hardware and software for families and for parents. Ultimately, it's the same muscle, which is now I have way more data and I can talk directly to customers. So it's actually much easier in some ways. And so you're really communicating with customers. You're seeing what they're telling you, both actually telling you, and then you're looking at the data as well. And then you're building products for them. So it's actually sort of a natural progression of where my career began in a lot of ways because retail buying really was like the ultimate training ground for understanding a consumer and building a business around it. And Rent the Runway was sort of an important stop for me because we were kind of creating a category that was all about meeting the needs of the consumer, which at the time the insight in 2009 was Facebook was becoming ubiquitous. People were attending maybe 10 weddings in a summer. You were posting the photos on Facebook and you didn't want to be seen in the same dress twice. That was the insight, kind of that the kernel of insight for Rent the Runway. And then a whole business was built around that. And then the next insight was, hey, people have to get dressed for work 5 days a week. They don't want to wear the same thing, but it's like really onerous to buy a different, whole different outfit for every single day of the week. Hey, we can solve that problem with rental. And that was the insight. And then we built a subscription business around that at Rent the Runway. And then kind of similarly, you think about this new business that I'm in, it's all about what are those key pain points for families? And then, okay, how do you build a solution for that? So it's more logical than it seems when you look at it on a piece of paper.
And so maybe stepping back, right, and thinking about your broader, very successful career, but having had pivots and the conversation we're having today, how are there examples of how did you balance that short-term risk, right? Of like, do I leave what I already know and I'm to some degree comfortable in my day-to-day versus the long-term potential upside of going to this other company, but there's still a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I do think in today's day and age that people underestimate the value, like the value of political capital. It matters a lot. You can't overweight it, right? But having people within an organization understand what you're good at and where you can bring real value and then helping you build your career, there's a ton of value there. So I always encourage people when they're thinking about like, okay, I'm like not happy in my job. I don't like my boss. Like I'm gonna quit and go find something new. The reality is it takes like a full year at most companies. And that's if you're spending some time in person. If it's a remote role, it's like it's so much harder. But it takes time for um for people to understand what you're good at and for you to sort of like get swimming in a business and actually like hit your stride. It takes like 6 or 9 months, usually sometimes longer. And so whenever I look at someone's resume and I see that they've changed jobs every 18 months, I'm always super skeptical because you haven't really even been able to deliver any value to the business for like the first year. Usually you're sort of taking before you're giving. So I do think it's important to stick it out a little bit within roles so that you can actually kind of get enough value and give enough value. Usually that means a couple years. That said, like, when great opportunities present themselves, you obviously want to take those great opportunities. So, I think it depends on people's risk tolerance, but I will say when great opportunities come up, I think it's a really interesting moment for job seekers, and there is a lot of churn out there right now, SaaS companies laying off a lot of people. It's a great moment to think about what kind of company is going to be successful in the future. And sort of thinking about risk in that way. Because companies that might have been really low risk would have been like, I definitely want to go work at Meta or Google, and those are really stable companies. And now it's like they're leading the layoff train. So like I think thinking also clearly about that risk trade-off about, over the next 3 to 5 years, what companies are going to be most successful.
And Anushka, so for me, for example, I started my career after CBS and went into banking. I was a banker for about a decade,
Mhm.
then went to corporate to do a similar role, but just corporate, right, for another decade. And I just came back to banking. So there are some, parallels there.
Yeah.
My question, the way that I approach it is I tend to talk to typically women, but it can be women and men, right? That I connect with, that I've met, throughout, right? Like my career, just to get advice, whether or not they're closer to the specific industry that I'm in. I think is less important for me personally, but curious how you feel about that connectivity with other folks as you're looking to make a pivotal, right, important decision
Yeah.
in your own
I think
career.
that's I think that's you're spot on. I think like, that's a huge piece of a process of anyone that's I think in either because they need to or because they want to, making a pivot in their career. I think the first thing to do is talk to a lot of people because that's the way you're actually going to learn about what's out there and what different companies do and, the culture of a different company and the direction that they're headed. You're not really going to get that from, going online or looking at job descriptions or anything like that. Like you're really going to find that out by tapping your network. And obviously the CBS network is amazing for that. And just talking to people about what is their company up to? What are their strategic priorities? What are the types of things they're hiring for right now? What are the things that are top of mind? I feel like that is such an important step in a process as people are looking towards making a pivot or, um, needing a new role.
And do you have then like a handful of people that are your go-tos, or how do you think of that?
Yeah, I definitely have my go-to people. I use an executive coach, which I always highly recommend to leaders as they're, in executive roles and also kind of evaluating moves into new roles, because I think there's a real clarity of thinking there that comes from coaching. But for sure, I have sort of a handful of people that I think know me well and kind of understand the types of things that would be a good fit for me. And always, leaning back on people you've worked with in the past, I think is always really interesting because they can help illuminate things about you that you sometimes don't even know yourself.
Right. They definitely know you, right? Like in a work context and could give you some helpful advice. And so if for someone that is considering a pivot today, what would you say are, 2 to 3 concrete steps that they should take or consider?
I definitely think talking to people, doing the research, like so often people will reach out to me and needing help or looking for a role and it's clear that they haven't kind of done the work. I feel like that is super important, especially if you're going to reach out, tap the network and ask for people's time. Like actually going in and doing the work and doing the research is super critical. But I think that's a key piece is talking to people and doing research. And then, I always think it's helpful when I was looking to leave Rent the Runway, I had been there for 7 years, 11 in total. It was like I was ready to go. And one of the first things that I did was make a list of the things that were most important to me, that were kind of what are the non-negotiable things that in an ideal world I'm going to get out of my next role. And that was actually a very helpful um, guidepost to me because as I got calls from recruiters and spoke to people about opportunities and this person introduced me to this person, which was great, you end up hearing about a lot of things that you're like, oh, maybe that's interesting, but in reality it totally doesn't match the criteria of the things that you're looking for. And so I feel like actually writing it down and saying, okay, these are the 3 or 4 non-negotiable things that I know I must have. It's a very, very helpful exercise. And a piece of that is also thinking really deeply about how your skills kind of uniquely position you to be great in XYZ type of company, whether that's I want to go, be in banking again and, how do my skills best position me at this point in my career to move back in a senior role.
And you talked about going to, at one point in your career, right, like a bigger role at Hudson Bay and, taking it partly. And, I think we've all probably been motivated by this. It's a big component, right? Like taking a bigger salary, ultimately, having some degree of regret or it just wasn't the right fit. How do you think of making a move, or have you ever, right, like made a move to a place where it's actually the opposite?
Um, I
You're
have
taking a pay cut.
I have taken two pay cuts in my career, I think, so far. Actually, three. Three, if you're counting just cash. Which, so I will say, I tend to be someone that cares a like little bit more about mission and role than optimizing for salary. So I know not everyone necessarily, everyone has like a different value stack of what matters to them. But actually taking the role at Rent the Runway just was the first example. I was making less in that first role because the company had just raised a Series A. It was like really early stage. I took a pay cut from pre-business school. So I had loans and, was making less money. It right-sized itself over time, but I was so excited about the opportunity and where the company was going. You have to remember in 2010, Rent the Runway came up at the same time as Uber, Airbnb. So like sharing economy wasn't even really a term yet. So it was super innovative. So for me, I valued that at that time over, I actually said no to a role that was like paying way more. So I had a direct comparison, but I was really excited about this opportunity. So that was one. I was a little younger. I didn't have like kids and, tuitions to pay and all that stuff. So it was a little easier. But I did make that decision two more times in my career because the role was right and I felt like there was going to be upside. And I think in more startup roles, you tend to get compensation and equity, and so you're sort of taking some of that risk, for the upside. So I personally have done that, and I don't regret any of those choices. I think they've all led to roles that have been really exciting, and fun, and have helped me get to a place where I'm a CEO today. And I might not have been able to be there, right, if I hadn't made some of those choices.
So take big risks,
I think
or
so.
calculated risks.
I think everyone's risk tolerance is different. I have a high, risk tolerance, and so I've taken a number of risks in my career, and I don't regret any of them. I think if they're grounded in something that you really believe in, something that you're really excited about, and you're going to be excited to wake up every day and go spend most of your waking hours doing it, then yes, dive right in.
Super. Any parting advice for us as we think about our own pivots?
Oh man, I think the biggest thing to me, there's all the logical stuff, like write down your top, the things that I said, talk to people, do a lot of research, write down your top criteria. I do think those things are really important, but ultimately, I think it all comes down to trusting your instincts. Like that, I did that in 2009, 2010 when I took the role at Rent the Runway. I love my parents. They're incredibly supportive. They're amazing people. They were like, hell no, do not take that job. What are you talking about? You have a consulting offer with a signing bonus and, the stable job. And I ultimately just trusted my instincts on really thinking that it was the right thing. And it transformed my career, right? Making that choice. So I always do think that people should be left brain, right brain and thinking about their career, which is like, sure, there's some level of like, okay, what is the practical and logical things to do? But I also think your instincts are a super important force that people sometimes ignore when they shouldn't.
Fantastic. Super helpful. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A, and then we'll turn it over. We'll separate in break rooms. Any questions?
I shared a question here in the chat. Do you want me to read it? My question
Yes,
was
that would be great.
about, yeah, sure. Saving Phil Johnson. My question was about you taking a role, a board role, and how you use this opportunity to expand your expertise, but also, expand learn about a new sector. So I just wanted you to speak about that and whether you have some advice on, but how you actually got that role.
Yeah, so just for clarity, that was not the main American Express corporate board.
Oh,
That would have been a really big get at that point in my career, even now. That was a
okay.
digital advisory board that they had set up more than 10 years ago now. They had a CMO that was very forward thinking and doing kind of a digital transformation, and she set up an advisory board of people that were in really forward-thinking, innovative consumer companies that were kind of digitally native. And so at that time, I was at Rent the Runway in my first go around. We had met, and she sort of tapped me to be on this board. And it was mostly founders, and I sort of got the opportunity to sit on this thing, and I was like, definitely wanted to be a part of it. That was super interesting, and I think I did that for a couple of years. I do think that whether it's consulting work or advisory work or board work is an amazing way to expand, learn new industries, kind of expand your scope of knowledge. I think it's always awesome. It's not necessarily always that easy to get kind of high profile board roles. There was a period of time when women were really being tapped for those. That has actually slowed down a lot over the last year or
Mhm.
two. But I think a great way to get into that is advisory, right? So there's always like startups and companies that could use free or low, equity based advisors, and I think that's a really interesting way to kind of expand your expertise and knowledge. And then Marina had a question.
I think Gentry also.
Oh yeah.
I do. Thank you. This has been really excellent. I've enjoyed your commentary so much. And you did talk about that it's hard to hire. And if you would just give us some expand on that if you could, and just give us if you've got some tips on how best practices in terms of hiring or how you've hired really good people that sit right under you. Be really interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, it's to me, hiring is an art and a science. Let's see if I can think of sort of my best practices. I have one sort of non-negotiable, and this sounds obvious, but I have found in the last 5 years it's not obvious anymore, which is you have to meet people in person. Never, ever, ever will I hire somebody that I haven't been able to meet in person. And I'll give an example. I recently hired someone that was so pregnant that they couldn't travel and they don't live locally. I flew to this person to take them to breakfast even though that seems like an inversion of the relationship, I didn't care, but I was not willing to make a senior level offer to someone without sitting and having me. And related to that is
Bring and having
I,
a meal.
yeah, I always have a meal with somebody. It could be my preference is dinner, it could be breakfast or lunch, but like just seeing how people interact in a more social setting, how they communicate with the staff at the restaurant, whether they say please and thank you, like really small things I actually think are super, super important. So that to me is like non-negotiable. And like very rarely I'll get really in a rush to make an offer to someone and I'll try to break my own rule. And like I have my HR team be like, no, your rule is. So I highly recommend that for everybody, no matter what level you're hiring. And I would say I have people on my team at more junior levels that have made the mistake of not doing this, and then they have gotten themselves into a lot of trouble for all kinds of reasons because the person shows up or doesn't show up. And there's all kinds of things you could have known about them had you just spent 5 minutes with them in person, and you can't know that. So that's my one hard and fast rule. And I actually think that that links to the like, the art of it all, which is just, do you have some kind of chemistry with the person? And can you imagine like spending a lot of time with them? And again, assuming these are senior level hires, I really do think like you have to be able to build a rapport and a trust, that's such a foundational relationship at a senior level that you have to see whether you can kind of build that. I think another sort of non-negotiable was for me is presentations because you can have two great interviews with somebody, maybe an intro interview and then a follow-up interview, and they can do great in that interview because generally an interview is more about them telling you things that they've done that they're experts in. And so you have to flip the script on people and um, have them go much deeper on something. And so for the most part, I won't hire someone without them delivering some kind of work product. And for me personally, that's a presentation. For some people, it's just like a take-home assignment and then they send it back. I also think this is a really helpful test right now on use of AI. So I recently hired someone who is quite tenured, not a spring chicken, let's say that. And he did his presentation, and it was very clear that he used AI for the presentation, which I was happy with. But it was also very clear that he knew everything in the presentation and could talk at length about it. And I actually had an opposite situation like 6 months ago where someone had interviewed super well. The presentation sent ahead amazing, 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 all clearly done by AI. Couldn't speak to a word of it. And so like being able to see the difference of that was fascinating because like use AI but still know what's happening. Using
Mhm.
AI and just having that be the expert, like not obviously what you're looking for. So like I learned so much from meeting the people in person and like having them do a presentation. And then of course there's all the rapport stuff, right? But those to me are like my must do non-negotiables.
I love that presentation idea. I haven't implemented that yet, but I'm going to now. And I will tell you, years ago, I hired somebody as an associate into our group, and he scored like the ticket to go to the gala with the founder of our company. And at dinner, he was waving his fork around the table and pointing at people with his fork. And I just thought, oh, if I'd had a meal with him before,
Yes.
it would have told me a lot, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh
I so
gosh.
appreciate that tip, right? I was embarrassed for him.
That's so funny. Yeah, that's proving why it matters right there.
Right. That's excellent. Thank you.
Yes, Robert, you're on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Uh, Given the fact that you've taken on so many different roles in companies at a high level, do you have any set protocol for assimilating quickly into your new work environment? Because in this day and age, there's the expectation level to have an impact, that significant impact, relatively unreasonably soon. So, is there a kind of a protocol that you use for getting up and running as quickly as possible?
Well, now that protocol would probably be totally different, but and I would use AI massively depending on whether the company was set up to have AI help me onboard. But if I think about 2 years ago when I was onboarding at Nanit, I read a book. It's like a paper book, very old school. Um, that was I can't remember the name of the book now, but it was I think about the first 90 days and how you can onboard into a company really effectively. It actually had some great frameworks for how to think about it. And I followed that book very closely. So if anyone here is like starting a new executive role, ping me and I will look up the name of the book and I will share it. But it was very effective. Um, but I will say this, I'm like a very fast-paced person. And I had this expectation that I would be able to know the business in like 6 months. And just the reality is, no matter how fast you move and how hard you work and how much content you consume and all the things, like it takes more than a year to back to the point I made a while ago. Like it takes more than a year to onboard into a company and actually understand the business, unless you have like the most simple business in the entire world and you're just selling ice cream or something. I don't know. But it takes time. So I do think that managing your own expectations and managing the expectations internally on what is going to be possible is important and trying to take at least the first 30 to 45 days to just listen and learn and not have an opinion. I think it's very hard to do that. I mean, reality, it should be like 3 months of doing that, but that's just not practical in most companies. But like, you just don't know the lore of a company for a while. Like, it takes a while.
Thank you.
Someone told me recently that they actually stayed within the same company for 25 years, but assumed different roles. So it's always been some sort of, right, like switch to some extent and a different challenge. And they said, in order to build trust with her team, like she would take them out for a coffee or lunch or just, have a meeting. And they would come with, a presentation and, telling them, this is what I'm thinking for the rest of the year. And she would stop them right there and said, let's put this aside. I just want to learn more about you. And that sort of like would disarm them, right? And
Yeah.
then they would start from a place where there was some degree of honesty and relationship, right? And the trust, came sooner. How do you think
Totally.
about that?
I think that's honestly super smart because one of the things coming into a role is actually understanding what the culture is, what are the players like, what are you working with, So actually one of the things before I even started at Nanit was I spent with my kind of the leadership team that I inherited, I spent time with each of them like for coffee basically, right? And the only agenda was learning about them and understanding what they thought the culture of the company was and like what work was working and what wasn't working. So it was like a totally human focused exercise. It was not like, show me the numbers and the metrics and explain to me the business or any of that. And I think it helped. That was one thing that helped me accelerate understanding what the company was, like what was the company, right? Like, what was the culture? How did things work? What was working, what wasn't working? So I totally agree with that.